Hi, I'm Carol Doak, author of my newest book, 60 Fabulous Paper Piece Stars. And today what I'd like to do is share a couple of tricks that actually were requested that I demonstrate. And so the first trick is going to be, how do you take a piece off? You've sewn it with that little tiny stitch to foundation paper, and oops, when you sew it, you find out that you have a hole over here and it doesn't cover the area. So I'm going to share with you how easy it is to take that piece off. The first thing I do is I use Scotch brand removable, keyword removable tape. And the reason I want to use removable is because I can put that tape on the foundation and just take it off. Now, not only can I just do that with the foundation, so it will remove easily, but it doesn't gum up my sewing machine needle. If you use a regular Scotch tape, it'll gum up your sewing machine needle. And this magic tape has a higher melting point, so when you're pressing from the other side, it won't melt. You don't ever want to put an iron directly to the tape. So the first step is to put the tape on the seam line that I'm going to remove. So you can see that I've positioned that tape right there. And now what I'm going to do is take, it can be an X-Acto knife. I like this tool. It's called an Ultra Pro Seam Ripper, but basically it's a razor. And so I can then lift up the fabric that I want to take off, and all I'm going to do is, as I pull it back, let me show you a close-up. You can see the threads right there are exposed. As long as you keep pressure on this, those threads are there before the fabric is there. So I am just keeping pressure, and you can hear it popping, and I'm just tapping those bars of thread. And so now I can show you what it looks like. I've taken that piece off, and you see the little bits of cut thread. I can just pull this up, and you can see how the thread is sticking to the foundation. So I'm just going to pull those away. And now I can take that same piece of fabric and reuse it, but my preference is that I'll reuse it on the edge that I didn't take off. So now I can go ahead and position that in the correct place, stitch on the same seam line through the tape, and that tape becomes my new foundation. And so I can move right on. So it really does take the frustration out of having to take a piece off. So I wanted to share that tip with you. The other tip is, the good news is all of these star blocks in the new book have a cutting list. Actually, the majority of my books, except for the very early ones that I did nearly 30 years ago, have cutting lists, which are worth their weight in gold. And I typically come up with the cutting list, and then I make the block from the cutting list to test it, and so that I know that they're accurate. And so I'm going to show you how I take measurements if I'm working through a block. So I'm going to use this transparent piece right here to show you how I position the ruler to take the measurements for a piece. I'm not an advocate of cut a hunk. I'm not an advocate of just estimating what the size is, because I can actually show you a block where the exact same shape and size piece has to be cut 2 different sizes because it's positioned differently. The entire key about taking measurements is, how is the fabric being positioned? So the number 1 fabric here, I'm positioning it this way. I have choices with the number 1 fabric. I could have also positioned it vertically. And so I measure when I do the number 1 piece, and I put the 1/4 inch line on the seam line, and then I let the ruler fall over, and you can see that I am 1.5 inches, so I'm going to tack a 1/2 inch on the other side. So that means that it's going to be 2 inches wide this way, and then lengthwise I give myself 1/4, 1/2 inch at one end, and then give myself a 1/2 inch on the other end. So this particular one would be 4 inches. And then I go ahead with the number 1 piece and measure it vertically, because you may decide, let's say, to use a striped fabric. So now I'm going to put the ruler this way to get the length and the width. So that 4 inches is going to work fine lengthwise, and widthwise the 2 inches is still going to be fine. So the same size will work for both directions for this particular piece. So I give you that option. After the number 1 piece, there are no options. There's only one way to measure. And how you measure is taking the line that you're going to sew. So to measure for number 2, the line I'm going to sew is right here. And I'm going to put the 1/4 inch line on the ruler, on the line I'm going to sew. And I look through the ruler to see the number 2 piece. And looking through the ruler to see the number 2 piece, I can cut this piece 1, 2, 3 3/4, or if I want to keep it simple, I can just cut it 4 inches long. Remember, it can always be bigger. And widthwise, if I cut it 2 inches, that'll be fine. So this can also be cut 2 by 4. Sometimes I simplify it by just, giving you an extra 1/4 inch to make the measurement simple, so that you're not having to cut umpteen different sizes. Then when I'm going to measure the number 3 piece, I'm going to do the same thing. I've got to put the 1/4 inch line on that seam line I'm going to sew for number 3, but I got to slide this ruler down all the way to that point and to get the length. So this is going to be at least 5.5 inches long, and widthwise, again, it will be 2 inches. I don't give myself the exact, 1/4 inch on one side, 1/4 inch on the other side. I'm always giving you at least an extra 1/2 inch on the other side, so that if that fabric moves, that you have extra fabric there if you need it. When you're measuring for triangles, and these are 1/2 square triangles, because this triangle, if you put 2 together, makes a square. Same thing here, makes a square. You're going to always measure the short side of the triangle. So here is, here we go. The short side of that triangle is 3.5 inches. And to that, I add 1 1/4 inches. So 3.5 and 1 1/4 inches makes 4 3/4. So that's how I know what size that needs to be. If I'm going through a foundation taking measurements, I just write the measurements right on the foundation, so that when I make the cutting list, it's very easy to know how to create the cutting list. So I hope that's helpful. The key is to make sure that you put the 1/4 inch line on the ruler, let it fall over the area you're measuring, and then give yourself a 1/4 on one and at least a 1/2 on the other. The other little tip is, if I'm doing a block that has several different size small pieces, and instead of giving you 6 different sizes to cut, I will combine, let's say everything is 2.5 inches or less. I will combine all of those and tell you to cut them 2.5 inches by 2.5 inches, because they're all going to work at that size, and the time and effort you'd take cutting 1.5 inches, 1 3/4 inches, and you're not going to really be wasting a lot of fabric doing that. So I do try to simplify the cutting list for you, because most of the time what you're doing with the fabric that you're cutting is you're using your rotary cutter to cut a strips. It's 4 layers wide, and then you're just cutting the pieces. And then once you cut them, you just label where you're going to use them. So I hope these tips help, and enjoy making your fabulous paper piece stars.